hold in the office.
Come on, you and I both know what I'm talking about.
I actually don't.
Listen, he is unstable. He's the one who tends to demean. He is unstable.
More than 70% of people.
People are exhausted. I would never say that about the American people. This is a democracy.
So do you support that?
This interview is interesting because it shows what happens when speakers use diversion tactics, how diversion ruins the flow and meaning in any conversation, and thus ruins the outcome for viewers. What should be enlightening ends up being the opposite. The worst part is that these speakers do it intentionally, to protect themselves first and foremost. This goes beyond political interviews. In day-to-day conversations, we run into people who deflect to avoid being held accountable for what they've said or done. If you're excited about language and how language works, subscribe for more videos. Time to get the party started.
When it comes to immigration, you supported allowing immigrants in the country illegally to apply for driver's license, to qualify for free tuition at universities, to be enrolled in free health care. Do you still support those things?
Listen, that was 5 years ago, and I'm very clear that I will follow the law. I have made that statement over and over again, and as Vice President of the United States, that's exactly what I've done, not to mention before.
This is a simple yes-no question. However, Harris doesn't treat it as such because she doesn't say yes or no. Her reaction unintentionally lets the viewers know that this is a sensitive question. She says, listen, which is used to show and in many cases feign sincerity and assertiveness. Same as phrases like let's be clear and look. It's part of politicians' media training.
So look, this is a complicated issue.
And I'm very
Coupled
clear
with her
that
intonation and the phrase over and over again, Harris makes it sound like she's being patient with Baier, as if he's the one who doesn't understand, and as if it's strange that she has to keep repeating herself. This way of acting slightly offended saves politicians and other people from having to go into details, in theory that is. Also, saying follow the law grants Harris leeway because the laws can easily be changed. Politicians make the law, so the question is, what law will Harris enforce as president? Because there's no clear no, Harris's response opens for such speculations, potentially. However, Baier's not done. In the following, notice how Harris keeps treating his simple yes-no questions as complex. This is telling.
If that's the case, you chose a running mate, Tim Walz, governor of Minnesota, who signed those very things into state law. So do you support that?
We are very clear, and I am very clear, as is Tim Walz, that we must support and enforce federal law, and that is exactly what we will do.
Thus, Harris didn't answer if she supports Walz's state law. However, reusing Baier's verb support could make it sound like she was being properly responsive to the issues that the question raised, which she wasn't. Harris's turn initial, delay, vowel lengthening. And sudden excessive arm movements are all indications of stalling. And stalling, especially after what should be an easy question, is a sign of diversion. One of Harris's diversion tactics is to regurgitate phrases from her media training, phrases that feign honesty.
We are very clear, and I am very clear, as is Tim Walz.
Yes, I think all viewers know who's implied in the we. After all, it's not that complicated. But anything to postpone the answer, I guess. There's an important distinction between a response and an answer. Harris responds, but she doesn't answer. Because what will a potential Harris administration make federal law? That's the question.
Your campaign slogan is a new way forward, and it's time to turn the page. You've been vice president for 3.5 years, so what are you turning the page from?
Considering that Biden has been in office for the past 4 years, this isn't the most obvious campaign slogan. This open question allows Harris to detail whatever's on her mind. However, it seems that the only thing on Harris's mind is platitudes. Let's watch.
What are you turning the page from?
Well, first of all, turning the page from the last decade in which we have been burdened with the kind of rhetoric coming from Donald Trump that has been designed and implemented to divide our country and have Americans literally point fingers at each other. rhetoric and an approach to leadership that suggests that the strength of a leader is based on who you beat down instead of what we all know. The strength of leadership is based on who you lift up.
The degree to which Harris resorts to her script, to her playbook, is staggering, especially considering that we live in a time when people can easily go back and listen to the empty repetitions that Harris delivers unapologetically.
That suggests that the strength of a leader is based on who you beat down instead of what we all know. The strength of leadership is based on who you lift up.
Think about it, Oprah. The idea that some would suggest and that my opponent and it suggests, which is that the measure of the strength of a leader is based on who you beat down. Come on. The real measure of the strength of a leader is based on who you lift up.
Where there is some suggestion that the measure of the strength of a leader is based on who you beat down, instead of where I believe most Americans are, which is to believe that the true measure of the strength of a leader is based on who you lift up.
Yes, because as we all know, Harris is all about lifting people up.
Do you think Donald Trump is a fascist?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do.
Also, what's it even supposed to mean? Who should be lifted up and why? And at whose expense? How can you lift everyone up when people have such vastly different opinions? Even on its own merits, this platitude doesn't make any sense.
Well, first of all, turning the page from the last decade.
Apparently, Harris hasn't learned much from her CNN interview.
I have served with President Biden. He has the intelligence, the commitment, and the judgment. By contrast, the former president has none of that.
It's based on who you lift up.
A new way forward and turn the page on the last decade of what I believe has been contrary to where the spirit of our country really lies.
But the last decade, of course, the last 3.5 years has been part of your administration.
Exactly. That's because Harris is too caught up in her rhetorical tactics to see that the administration she represents has had a huge influence on the last decade. Contrasting an alleged negative past to an alleged positive future is a method that politicians use to create a sense of urgency. And taking a closer look, the words have no objective meaning. A platitude like the spirit of our country is completely dependent on the eye of the beholder, what each person values and believes. It's not a thing you can presuppose or even observe. How do you observe a spirit? This is why political rhetoric is most often subjectivity, masked as objective truths.
But the last decade, of course, the last 3.5 years has been part of your administration.
I'm talking about an era that started about a decade ago.
I see. Well, that explains it. This doesn't change the fact that her administration has had a huge influence in the last decade, so this isn't an actual counter-argument. This is merely Harris repeating herself. Harris should have been interrupted here, which doesn't happen, of course, because CNN is Harris's safe space.
The last decade in which we have been burdened to divide our country and have Americans literally point fingers at each other.
Pointing fingers at each other?
Yes.
Yes, because Harris wouldn't dream of saying anything divisive or point fingers at anyone.
LGBT rights are under attack.
My pronouns are she and her.
Under attack by a Justice Department. Under attack by a Senate nominee and a judicial nominee.
In which we have been burdened.
So, who's the we? Because judging from what she herself has said, both sides of the aisle can't be included in this we. Inclusion is code for exclusion, because the inclusion of some groups always implies the exclusion of other groups. Harris's rhetoric hinges on division. Without division, she can't create a protagonist-antagonist narrative and come across as a savior. The worst part is that Harris isn't even done with her repetitions of platitudes. Brace yourself.
The strength of leadership is based on who you lift up. The strength of an American president, which is one who understands that the vast majority of us have more in common than what separates us.
Madam Vice President, more than 70%.
Americans have so much more in common than what separates us. That we have so much more in common than what separates us.
This is as generic as it gets, which is precisely the point. It saves Harris from going into specifics, from discussing all the areas where people don't have more in common than what separates them. A platitude like this is part of constitutive rhetoric, which is about the speaker constituting a collective we for self-benefit, even though the people included in this we might not have much in common, to get people to do what the speaker wants them to do, in this case, to vote for Harris.
Madam Vice President, more than 70%.
No, that can't be turning the page, because she hasn't specified anything. If these are the empty platitudes that the campaign slogans build on, the campaign slogan's deceptive.
Madam Vice President, more than 70% of people
That is about turning the page on rhetoric that people are frankly exhausted of, Bret.
More than 70% of people tell.
Frankly, it's difficult to see Harris's statement as anything other than projection, because her repetitions and unspecific rhetoric are exactly what many people find exhausting.
More than 70% of people tell the country is on the wrong track. They say the country is on the wrong track. If it's on the wrong track, that track follows 3.5 years of you being vice president and President Biden being president. That is what they're saying, 79% of them. Why are they saying that? If you're turning the page, you've been in office for 3.5 years.
This is a complex preface. The purpose of complex prefaces is to problematize the politician's past actions and statements and make it difficult for the politician to answer, because in political interviews, the interviewer shouldn't only obtain information, but also ask the politician to account for her words and actions. The interviewer acts or should act as a substitute for the skeptical viewer, asking the questions that the skeptical viewer would ask if given the chance. Basically, the opposite of this.
A moment that you shared, that the world shared with your son, Gus. You were speaking, the camera caught him, so incredibly proud of you, so emotional, saying, "That's my dad."
Yeah, I don't know as a father I could have ever imagined that. I'm grateful for so many reasons to be on this ticket, but that moment...
And last question, Madam Vice President, the photograph that has gone viral. You were speaking, one of your grandnieces that you were just talking about was watching you accept the nomination. You didn't explicitly talk about gender or race in your speech, but it obviously means a lot to a lot of people, and that viral picture really says it. What does it mean to you?
In my opinion, Harris's response to Baier's critical question is the strangest one in this interview. Let's watch.
Why are they saying that? If you're turning the page, you've been in office for 3.5 years.
And Donald Trump has been running for office.
But you've been the person holding the office.
Come on.
Madam
You
Vice
and I
President.
both know what I'm talking about. You and I both know what I'm talking about.
I actually don't. What are you talking about?
What I'm talking about is that over the last decade, people
you're the
have
lever of
become.
power.
But listen.
No matter how many times Harris says listen to feign assertiveness, as if there's actually something to listen to, these 20 seconds of response time without an answer are very telling. As Harris struggles to come up with something, anything, she uses intonation to suggest that it's strange that she even has to say it. However, this condescending or slightly condescending intonation falls flat when what she says is completely out of context.
And Donald Trump has been running for office.
Madam Vice President.
You and I both know what.
With this, Harris deceptively relies on alleged shared knowledge between her and Baier in order to dodge the question. Even though Baier doesn't know, that's why he's asking. Even Harris herself doesn't seem to know what she's talking about, as revealed by her pauses, self-corrections, and restarts.
What I'm talking about is that over the last decade, people have become. But
unintentionally, this shows that Harris is easily thrown off balance. After 20 seconds of response time, Harris finally finds something she thinks she can use. Unfortunately, though, it has nothing to do with Baier's question.
Listen, over the last decade, it is clear to me, and certainly the Republicans who are on stage with me, the former chief of staff to the president, Donald Trump, former defense secretaries, national security advisor, and his vice president.
Anyone else? Because I'm not sure we've heard enough. Anything to postpone the answer.
National security advisor and his vice president. One, that he is unfit to serve, that he is unstable, that he is dangerous, and that people are exhausted with someone who professes to be a leader who spends full time demeaning and engaging in personal grievances and it being about him instead of the American people. People are tired of that.
The irony of Harris talking about people being exhausted from someone who demeans and engages in personal grievances, while she's literally demeaning and engaging in personal grievances. The part about people being exhausted, as if Harris can speak for all people, seems to occur every time Harris is projecting.
That is about turning the page on rhetoric that people are frankly exhausted of, Brett.
More than 70% of people tell,
and it being about him instead of the American people.
If Harris's rhetoric is really about putting the American people first, it's contradictory that she engages in evasion and diversion and doesn't give direct answers that the American people can use. Here, for example, rather than addressing people's concerns, she deflects by attacking her opponent. Even though Harris is all about lifting people up, we must never forget that. Thankfully, Baier interrupts Harris's diversion tactic and repeats his original question.
People are tired of that.
If that's the case, why is half the country supporting him? Why is he beating you in a lot of swing states? Why, if he's as bad as you say, that half of this country is now supporting this person who could be the 47th president of the United States? Why is that happening?
This is an election for president of the United States. It's not supposed to be easy.
I know, but
it's not supposed to be. It is not supposed to be a cakewalk for anyone.
So are they misguided, the 50%?
Harris protects herself by using a stating the obvious tactic, which, combined with her intonation, makes it seem like it's strange that Baier doesn't understand this, when in reality it's Harris who doesn't offer specific, well-argued speculations. Harris's defense is so generic that it could be said by anyone at any time, because everybody knows it's an election and that it's not supposed to be easy. That has nothing to do with people's reservations about her specifically. Next, Harris makes a sneaky move. I'll explain after this.
So are they misguided, the 50%? Are they stupid? What is it?
I would never say that about the American people. And in fact, if you listen to Donald Trump, if you watch any of his rallies, he's the one who tends to demean and belittle and diminish the American people. He's the one who talks about an enemy within. What is it? I would never say that about the American people.
Would never say that, as in she can't say that. The sneaky thing Harris does here is that rather than answering the question, she tries to use Baier's yes no questions to her advantage. She elaborates on them as if that's what they're talking about, which it isn't.
I would never say that about the American people. And in fact, if you listen to Donald Trump, if you watch any of his rallies, he's the one who tends to demean.
Baier's question called for an educated guess, and Harris once again chooses to deflect by demeaning her opponent. Even though it's only her opponent who demeans, of course. There's nothing divisive about Harris's rhetoric at all.
The forces of hate and division that are trying to tear us apart.
He has talked about locking people up because they disagree with him. This is a democracy. And in a democracy, the President of the United States, in the United States of America, should be willing to be able to handle criticism without saying he'd lock people up for doing it. And this is what is at stake, which is why you have someone like the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff saying what Mark Milley has said about Donald Trump being a threat. He's the one who tends to the United States of America.
He's quoted in the Bob Woodward book that way, yes. Let me ask you this, Madam Vice President. You called Donald Trump.
The significance of that.
If they aren't stopped early on, diversion tactics will end up making many people think that it's the speaker who's deflecting who's won the argument, which is wrong. Unfortunately, outrage, or fake outrage, is an effective diversion tactic because it appeals to people's emotions, so that many people forget to ask themselves what the issue was actually about. This particular exchange could be seen as an example of that, because looking back, what was it that started it?
That is what they're saying, 79% of them. Why are they saying that if you're turning the page?
And instead of answering Baier's original question, Harris started lashing out. That's the timeline. And Harris demeans her opponent, even though she always puts the American people above self-interest and self-benefit.
And it being about him instead of the American people.
This way, they end up discussing Harris's diversion tactic and not the original question.
Listen,
Are they stupid? What is
God,
it?
I would never say that about the American people. And in fact, if you listen to Donald Trump, if you watch any of his rallies, he's the one who tends to demean.
So in that sense, Harris won this round.
Let's not
Donald
diminish
Trump,
the significance
you
of that.
However, it's not a win because it's dishonest and unenlightening for viewers.
Handle criticism without saying he'd lock people up.
This is a deceptive hyperbole, as there are many people who've criticized Trump harshly without being told they should be locked up.
He's so stupid. He's so stupid, he can't even say anything clever or smooth.
It's so weird that Donald Trump is just across the street, because he doesn't belong in my city. I don't know where he belongs.
You have called him a fraud, a con artist. You've said
A lot worse names than that.
he's because, as you've said before, this guy's a con artist, and he's gotten away with it for years.
Yet, all of this doesn't stop this totally unbiased interviewer from portraying De Niro as the victim.
You have no upside in having this conversation, in speaking out against Donald Trump. You are making yourself a target. The interview will air, and he will immediately find a reason to talk bad about you in public.
Yeah.
But you're choosing to use your platform.
The fact that De Niro can say
Yeah.
and keep a straight face speaks to his acting skills, because the two of them have spent minutes talking bad about Trump, giving Trump plenty of reasons to respond. But if Trump responds, De Niro is a victim. What a convenient way to always have the upper hand. What's okay for me isn't okay for you.
Which is why you have someone like the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff saying what Mark Milley has said about Donald Trump being a threat.
No matter how much Harris uses pathos to appeal to people's emotion, something which she as a prosecutor has had plenty of opportunity to excel in, it doesn't change the fact that there'll always be people who say that about presidential candidates. It doesn't make it true, and it doesn't change the fact that there are people who have said the same about them. That's why it's the specifics that matter, not the empty platitudes and generic rhetorical attacks on the opponent, because in my opinion, it's the latter that people actually find exhausting. In my opinion, people want to hear candidates talk about specific solutions and not about what a bad person their opponent supposedly is. If you liked the video, be sure to click the like button. See you next time.